Okay. Survival horror on hard is not happening. Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am Many Ninjas, and I'd like to welcome you back to my Double Dragon Neon playthrough on the Double Dragon difficulty, otherwise known as the hardest difficulty. And truly, it's living up to that title at the hardest difficulty, as Mission 9 is about to demonstrate. It's only appropriate to play this particular mission on Halloween of all days, because at this point the game's taken a turn to the occult with this interesting enemy selection which you're seeing the concept art for. Billy, you're going to have to work on your landing a bit. Before we really get into action, just making a quick adjustment to the power-ups in use. In this case, switching from the lightning stance I was experimenting, or the lightning attack I was experimenting with, to something a bit more useful, as well as changing the stance back from absorb during one of the numerous failed attempts on this stage to something else. At this point, I've gone to my tried and true magic gambit along with the invincible spin kick special in order to set it up so I can spam that particular move as much as possible. One of the reasons I really want to be able to spam it in this first segment of the stage, which is at this difficulty honestly brutal to get through, is that the only standable spot for anyone that is present here and is a ground-based enemy is the mouth of the previous boss, which was just dispatched in the last video. And of course, you probably figured out by now, anyone who falls off will be instantly killed, or in Billy's case, will suffer severe damage, which it's already bad enough under normal difficulty, but in this case is insane. As on top of being hit there, I took the added damage from falling off. Of course, any and all Roxys that appear in this section are completely unaffected by the nice little standing space, although, as it will probably be demonstrated in the later part of the video, if they land and then do their little full screen dive off to try to ram into you, and then ram into the hill, they will actually die as a result, because it will be considered a fall just like everybody else. Fortunately, one of the few good things about that particular move in this particular room. Another thing worth mentioning is at an earlier part here, I'm not sure if it's demonstrated at this point of the video, for some reason the Lindas that are attacking with their whips somehow get some kind of a projectile add-on to the whips at this stage of the game, which is actually really damn curious. Oh, and there's an example of the Roxy rocketeering herself straight to her doom. The basic strategy for this first section of Mission 9 is to dizzy the ground enemies as quickly as you possibly can in order to throw them off the stage and subsequently deal with anything else that's coming your way, and for the Roxys that pop up, to knock them down to the ground with the axe kick as soon as you can, and if you happen to have something like a baseball bat, use it because they will actually react like a normal enemy and be dizzied, and subsequently fall off to their dooms, or at least try to get it so they will dash into the hill over there harmlessly and basically insta-kill themselves. Fortunately, after dealing with those Roxys, the Abobo is easy enough to get through. Very good too, because last count, I had 0 lives left. Fortunately, as Billy fails to stick the landing again, the game is generous enough to give you a few extra lives if you make sure to venture back just a little in order to break these tomb onions in the background and to pick up 2 extra lives there, which in this case will bring you back to even Steven. Alright, just taking a momentary pause to just consider using a different special for this particular stage. As you can see by the description, Healing Touch allows you to either heal your co-op player by attacking with them, or in this case it has a special use against undead characters, which this stage is full of, and will actually damage them as well as kind of send them popping upward so you can do a down hit on them. And basically, as a side note, as you could see, Shang-Chi, which is a new addition to the game, effectively pulls a Black Knight where in order to defeat the enemy you have to first break him apart. And as for what's going on here, I'm going to say very loosely that these are reskinned Williamses, only with a key difference being in this particular stage, all the enemies that appear in skeleton format have the added ability to not actually be dizzy. You cannot dizzy any skeletons in this stage, which becomes very tedious, as you'll basically just have to keep beating them until they eventually fall from lack of hit points. this makes use of the healing touch special in order to get around them. Even more so potent because that's the only way to really knock them down. Mind you, a very unfortunate flaw of the healing touch is that it does require quite a bit of a wind-up in order to get started, so they probably can jab you out of it, which means, now that I think of it, I'm probably going to be switching that off at this point. However, what I am going to keep handy is the Absorb stance, which I equipped for this section, since due to the ability of the skeletons to basically just cancel out of even their hit states to attack you at any time, especially of any weapons, there isn't exactly a plethora of health items at this particular stage, which means you'll want to keep your health up, especially with all the beating you're going to possibly be taking, or in my case, quite literally be taking as this stage goes along. Basically, just making a quick momentary change to see if I can use the maxed out Fireball in order to damage this skeleton from afar. Let's see how that's going. Admittedly, even at this point, while it works pretty well as lightning, to hit enemies that are at a distance, it still doesn't do a great deal of damage, so you still want to get close and personal to beat these guys around. Also, as you can probably tell from the skeleton's questionable stance, as well as the fact that it's wielding a whip, that is in fact a reskin of Linda Lash. Just to give you an idea of the kind of enemy skeletons that will be popping up there, you'll see skeletized versions of Williams's, Linda's, as well as Shun's off the top of my head. Ichisumi pretty much shows up in a regular form, although it's with a much more pale kind of color output due to the scenery. To give you an idea of how the lightning special works in a nutshell, you can press your special button in order to spam a single lightning bolt that will strike upwards to, I believe, 3 enemies at once in a very rapid fashion, although you really only want to use this attack if you have an enemy on screen. Otherwise, there will only be a single lightning bolt that will target Billy himself for quite a bit of damage. As for the stance I'm using, as I probably mentioned before, and unfortunate loss of a life there, or maybe not quite a life, but I'm effectively dead unless I happen to be able to punch one of the Ichisumis or the skeleton over there, get a little health back. But, as I was saying, the Absorb stance pretty much means that anytime you hit an opponent with a regular attack, not a kind of weapon use, unless it happens to be something that is a melee weapon like a bat, but basically anytime you hit an opponent normally, you will gain back at least a small bit of health for every single strike. In this case, since I have it fairly far along, I believe it's 42 or 43 off the top of my head of the possible 50 discs, I'm getting back 22 health for each and every successful strike. And this counts not only towards enemies and everything, but as well as general obstacles too. And with this last wave, Ichisumi is just about done. Yep, there she's done at this point. We move onward to the next part of the stage. Moving on to the very next section, we're introduced to one of the strangest weapons you can use in the game, this odd kind of torso bat thing with an eyeball. As you can see, it's actually quite useful because with each successful strike, you get back quite a bit of health. Unfortunately, it doesn't last too long. On the bright side though, more often than not, you can fill up an entire health bar that way. Now to think about it, it did slip my mind when we were originally encountering them. The Jiangxis also have a little extra kind of a built-in feature once you knock their heads off. Their heads can actually be used as an added projectile, which you can toss at other opponents, and the severed head will start biting them for a little bit. Kind of acting like a very disturbed Halloween version of the Ichisumi fans. To be entirely frank, it's not exactly the most practical weapon at this point, but the whip at least does a pretty good job of keeping enemies at bay. Which is pretty good because, quite frankly, as you can see what's going on right there, while I'm attempting to dispatch one of the skeletons, the Jiangxi is kind of bouncing around and can try to get in a free hit or two. Because even though the hits might subsequently hit him, it still doesn't really stop him from attacking too much. Suffice to say, I am really not a fan of just how much extra health these skeletons got on Double Dragon difficulty. Because this stage is going to be dragging on really long as I try to play a little bit more conservatively and basically just slowly but surely punch them out. At least on the bright side, while it is time consuming, all the extra punching that has to go on in order to actually take them out does give me a chance to use the absorb stance to its fullest and refill my health as much as possible during this stage, which once again, due to the very rare amount of health items that actually pop up aside from these demonic bat things, which only pop up every now and then, you don't really get a chance to recharge your health too often. Why would it be so important to keep your health up? You saw those two 1-ups I ran into earlier? Unless I happen to have missed something during this whole time, those will be the only 1-ups you see from here on out. So basically, what you have from the start of this section is all you got to work with. While the AI of the enemies may be stupid enough in order to either be able to be easily knocked back into the spiked rollers over there, just keep in mind that if the spiked rollers happen to get a hold of you, it will do an insane amount of damage, which, due to the lack of health, you really don't want and can't afford. Fortunately there, the invincibility frames afforded me just enough time to avoid getting what would have been a very costly hit. While I'm not quite sure exactly why that skeleton had a bat, I'll be glad to accept its kind donation of a weapon, because quite frankly with the enemies to come, it'll be pretty useful. I believe off the top of my head, although normal conventional weaponry and attacks won't necessarily knock down a skeleton too much, bats still work fairly well, especially with the fact that the game will, as it just did, still throw in the odd actual living opponent every now and then. One of the other few bright sides of these skeleton-based enemies, and in addition that they will still be knocked around pretty badly by weapons like the bat, they are also still affected by things like the springboard there, and can still be pelted rather nicely with the arrows that are subsequently falling every, give or take a second or so. These arrows, now that I think about it, are dropping really fast, especially compared to how they were in the assault zone. Alright, very important that I get a hold of the demonic bat thing, because while I'm not sure that actually restores health for Williams there when he uses it on me, it unfortunately does an obscene amount of damage still, so I don't exactly want to let him have it. At this point, I've heard quite a few people will say that okay way to get through these later stages is to basically just equip Magic Gambit and then spam something like Lightning in order to clear out the enemies in a fairly easy fashion, which I could see how it could work here, but unfortunately for me I forgot I was actually using Absorb rather than Magic Gambit, so I obviously don't have as many uses at my disposal. And it also doesn't hurt that even though I'm using Absorb, I'm getting knocked over quite a few times at this point, which is pretty much draining any and all health that I was building up at the time. Probably the only bright side to this particular stage at this juncture is that, for the most part, barring one more enemy that I can think of, you've basically seen all the variety of different enemies that you're going to be coming across, so there won't be anything overly surprising or problematic coming in from here on out. The downside of everything, though, is that since you've already seen how to take care of these enemies on a normal basis, the game will be happy to send wave after wave of them your way, and of course, at this juncture, in the skeleton forms, you can't dizzy them anymore, and that means you can't necessarily throw them around as easily, or do anything else that would have made them fairly easy to deal with as you could have earlier in this title. If anything, the first stages up to this point was a warm-up point to get to here, which is where the real difficulty of the title begins. Off the top of my head, I believe this will be the last wave of enemies this particular section of the stage throws my way, which is very good because, although I'm using the opportunity to keep my health pretty full, admittedly it does get rather tedious, just constantly punching them just to make sure that they don't get a chance to properly attack me back. Part of the reason you don't see me using the heavier attack is because it will, in this case of the the skeleton shun here, give them enough time to throw in a quick jab or two, which, considering the amount of damage even the relatively weak dive is doing at this point, I don't want to give them the opportunity. Springboard 1, Skeleton 0. And with that said and done, as you can probably tell by the zooming effect, we've gone back to being able to traverse the stage normally, and we'll be going on to the next part of the mission. This next part of the stage is effectively what I'll dub the calm before the storm here, as there are no real enemies here, just a space worm here that you can beat up in order to get some added mixtapes, health items, batteries and such, in order to just kind of top up. If you had bothered to keep the key throughout that whole mess beforehand, you could use it to unlock the item here, or the chest here, and admittedly there's nothing too interesting there. Here's the tapesmith that the level select screen was mentioning, which makes it probably the last time to update your mixtapes before the final mission, which will be the last time subsequently that you actually get something from a shopkeep. And basically, since there's nothing else I need from this section, we're going to move on to the last part of the stage. And now, aside from the very start of this mission, here is my second most hated section of this particular stage. The reason why I hate it is that because of these spiked rollers that are hovering in the air there, anything that has to be jumping will be knocked back for quite a bit of damage. And in Billy's case, an obscene amount of damage. While this is good for dealing with the shun enemies that will frequently jump to their own demises as this is going along there, a very good thing since, quite frankly, they'll be throwing a lot of skeleton as well as regular shuns in this section. Unfortunately, that means things like my spin kick will basically be useless at this point, since it will still actually manage to register as being high enough to hit the rollers. Therefore, at this point you really want to stick to specials that keep you grounded. Also worth mentioning is just a quick reminder that Shun does have a rising attack, which will knock you upward and basically straight into the spiked rollers at any opportunity, as well as while you can use a springboard on your enemies, they can equally do the same to you, so you should be careful where you're standing. Once you get past the skeleton Lindas, and as well as these skeleton Shuns, that basically leaves you with the last Williams or two to deal with, as well as this new green Abobo. To get through these last few enemies here, I'm basically using the springboard in order to send the Bobo flying, hopefully into the spiked rollers, and for the Williams, I can beat them up fairly normally, with a reminder now that I just realized it from the footage here, that the uppercuts can actually send Williams flying into the spiked rollers as well. And of course, where it's opportune, I basically just used up what left of the... Ouch. I was basically using what was left of the special bar in order to spam lightning in order to at least get a few extra hits in where possible. Also, it's slipped my mind, but the skeleton Lindas were carrying grenades, which clearly I used there. And I'll probably to use at least one more before this little bit is done here. Which, as I just learned from doing it here, you could also use the ground punch in order to do a grenade shot that will actually not harm you, where if you just toss it normally, it could affect you as well if you happen to be standing too close. Now that the enemy count has been wilted down to this single Abobo here, Billy is once again safe, and will finally be able to see the end of this stage and moving on to the next one. Alright, let's proceed a little bit more to stage right, where you can begin to see the entrance of the Neon Fortress, otherwise known as the last stage of this game, which I'm very thankful to see. Now that I finally have a completely successful run of Mission 9 on the Double Dragon difficulty to show off, now we'll be moving for next time into Mission 10, the final stage of the Neon Fortress. Considering the length of the Neon Fortress though, with the additional boss fights that are entailed there, I'm going to actually be breaking that up into more than one video, because I imagine the last boss fight will be needing probably a separate video of its own due to the length that will be occurring during this run. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, and also, Happy Halloween!